Before you learned what a chart was, you already had a relationship with money. Before you knew what a stop-loss was, before you understood risk to reward, before you had ever heard the words position sizing or psychological edge, you had already been taught how to feel about money, what it meant when there was enough of it, what it meant when there was not, whether it was something that arrived reliably or something that was always slightly out of reach, whether the people around you treated it as a tool or as a source of tension, whether losing it was a manageable inconvenience or a genuine threat to everything that mattered. You did not choose those lessons. You absorbed them, the way a child absorbs everything. And not through study or decision, but through observation and repetition and the specific emotional atmosphere of a household where money was present or absent or fought over or whispered about or celebrated or treated with the kind of quiet anxiety that nobody names but everyone feels. Those early lessons did not disappear when you opened your first trading account. They went underground. They became the invisible architecture beneath your conscious understanding of markets. And now, years later, they are expressing themselves in your trading in ways that have nothing to do with your strategy and everything to do with what money meant before trading ever entered the picture. This is what nobody in the trading education space talks about. Every course you have ever taken started at the chart. It started with the technical, the analytical, the strategic. It assumed that the mind sitting in front of that chart was a neutral instrument, that the only programming relevant to your trading performance was the programming you acquired after you decided to trade. That assumption is wrong, and it is costing you in ways you may not yet have the framework to see. My name is Mark Douglas. I spent decades studying the psychology of trading performance. I worked with traders who had everything the analytical approach requires and still could not produce consistent results. Brilliant, prepared, hard-working traders who kept finding the same invisible ceiling, who kept breaking rules they fully intended to follow, who kept producing emotional responses to the market that their rational minds could not explain. What I eventually understood was that the trading desk is not where the problem starts. The trading desk is where it surfaces. The root of most persistent trading psychology problems lives much further back, in a room that had nothing to do with markets, in a time before the charts existed. In the earliest and most formative lessons every human being receives about what money is, what it does, and what it means about you when you have it or when you lose it. This video is about those lessons, where they come from, how they migrate into your trading without your awareness, and what you must do to identify them clearly enough that they stop running your decisions from below the surface. If you have ever felt that your trading problems go deeper than strategy, that there is something beneath the technical failures you cannot quite name, must like this video now. What I am about to describe is the layer most traders never reach. The mind forms its most durable beliefs during the period of life when it has the least capacity for critical evaluation. A young child cannot stand back from the environment it is growing up in and assess whether the messages it is receiving about money are accurate or healthy or functional. It simply receives them. It absorbs them through repetition and emotional intensity and the specific, powerful experience of watching the adults. It depends on respond to financial reality. When a parent expresses anxiety about a bill, the child does not have the cognitive architecture to contextualize that anxiety. It does not understand the details of the financial situation. What it understands is the emotional signature of the moment, the tension in the voice, the change in atmosphere, the specific feeling that money and worry and threat belong in the same category. When money arrives and the household relaxes, the child learns that too. That money resolves tension, that having it produces safety, that its presence or absence has a direct and powerful effect on the emotional temperature of everything around it. These observations accumulate silently across years of childhood experience into a set of beliefs that feel less like beliefs and more like facts, less like learned conclusions and more like the way things simply are. They become part of the operating system. The background programming that runs beneath conscious thought and shapes emotional responses before the rational mind has the chance to intervene. And here is what makes this relevant to trading in a way that cannot be overstated. Trading puts you in direct, repeated, high-intensity contact with money, with gaining it and losing it, with having it and watching it reduce, with the specific experience of financial uncertainty that the market produces on every time frame from the 1-minute chart to the annual performance review. And every time that contact occurs, the operating system that was written in childhood activates, not consciously, not in a way that announces itself as old programming influencing current behavior. It activates the way all deeply embedded programming activates, as a feeling, as an automatic response, as the emotional reaction that arrives before the rational mind has processed what is happening. And the trader who learned early that money is scarce and its loss is dangerous does not sit down at the trading desk and think today, I will behave as though money is scarce and its loss is dangerous. He simply feels the familiar tightening when a position moves against him. He simply finds himself unable to take the loss that his rules designated. He simply discovers that cutting a winning trade early feels like the only sensible response to profit that might disappear. He does not connect these responses to childhood. Why would he? The chart is right in front of him. The trade is live. The explanation that presents itself is always technical. The setup was wrong. The timing was off. The market was manipulated. The real explanation is much further back. Across the years I spent working with struggling traders, and I began to notice that the psychological patterns producing the most persistent problems were not randomly distributed. They clustered into recognizable types. And when I began exploring the histories behind those types, the same early money environments kept appearing as the source material. Here are the 5 most common childhood money patterns and exactly how each one expresses itself at the trading desk. The first pattern, the scarcity household. This is the environment where money was consistently not enough. Not necessarily in the dramatic sense of genuine poverty, though sometimes that too. Often simply the persistent background feeling of not quite enough, of conversations about what could not be afforded, of the specific tension that appears when the month has more expenses than income, and of watching a parent check the account before spending on anything beyond the essential. The child growing up in this environment develops a specific relationship with money. It is precious because it is rare. Its loss is threatening because there is not enough to absorb the loss comfortably. Having it produces relief. Not having it produces anxiety at a level that feels existential rather than inconvenient. At the trading desk, this pattern produces a trader who cannot let winners run. The profit on a winning trade feels immediately precious. It feels like the relief the household felt when money arrived, and the specific fear that it will disappear, that what was briefly present will return to absence, drives the hand toward the exit button long before the trade has reached its potential. Yet this trader cuts winners at a fraction of their target, not because the analysis changed, but because the accumulated profit activates the scarcity response. The profit feels too important to risk, too rare to expose to the possibility of reversal. It must be secured, immediately, before the market takes back what briefly felt like enough. He also overtrades, because in the scarcity mindset, each trade feels like an opportunity that must be taken. The fear of missing an entry, of watching money that could have been captured pass without participation, drives him into positions that his criteria do not fully support. Better to be in a mediocre trade than to miss the profit it might produce. The scarcity pattern does not distinguish between valid setups and marginal ones. It simply responds to the perceived opportunity to have more. The second pattern, the shame and money household. This environment is one where financial failure carried moral weight, where losing money, making a bad financial decision, or being in debt was not simply an unfortunate event, but evidence of a character flaw. where the adults around the child treated money mistakes with a level of emotional intensity that communicated that such mistakes revealed something true and damning about the person who made them. This can appear in wealthy households as much as struggling ones. The specific currency of this pattern is not the amount of money, but the moral significance attached to its management. The parent who responded to a child's financial mistake with shame rather than guidance. The household where money was discussed in terms of worthiness. Yeah, where having it meant you were smart and capable, and where losing it meant you were not. At the trading desk, this pattern produces the trader who cannot take a loss. Not cannot in the sense of lacking knowledge of the rule. Cannot in the sense that accepting the loss activates the shame response that was wired into the relationship between financial failure and personal inadequacy decades ago. Closing a losing trade is not experienced as a normal, expected, statistically inevitable part of operating in a probabilistic market. It is experienced as evidence. Evidence of the same inadequacy the household communicated was revealed by money mistakes. So the position is held, past the stop, past the point of rational defense, with increasingly elaborate justification. Because the justification is not about the trade, it is about the self. And it is the mind constructing a defense against the verdict that closing the loss would represent. This trader also struggles to review his journal honestly, because the journal is a record of his mistakes. And reviewing mistakes, in the framework this pattern created, is not a learning process. It is a confrontation with evidence about who he is. And who he is, according to the programming, is someone whose financial mistakes reveal a fundamental inadequacy. The third pattern, the volatile money household. This is the environment where the financial situation was unpredictable, where abundance and scarcity alternated without a pattern the child could learn to anticipate, where money arrived dramatically and disappeared in the same manner. Where the emotional atmosphere of the household swung between celebration and crisis in cycles that had no reliable schedule. The child in this environment develops a relationship with money that is calibrated for volatility. It learns that financial states are temporary, that profits do not stay, that losses do not stay either, that the only appropriate response to any financial condition is preparation for the condition that will inevitably replace it. At the trading desk, this pattern produces the trader who self-sabotages at the moment of success. This is one of the most confusing patterns for the traders who carry it because the self-sabotage is not conscious. The account grows to a level that feels unusually high, and then, without the trader fully understanding why, the decision-making changes. So, positions are sized up beyond the rules. Trades are taken on setups that would not normally qualify. Risk management loosens in ways that feel like confidence but function as exposure. And the account returns to a level that feels normal. The volatile money pattern has established a ceiling that feels like the natural resting point. Above it, something feels wrong. Something feels unstable and temporary in the way that abundance always felt in the household. Below a certain level, something clicks into the familiar rhythm of the environment the pattern was built in, and the trading behavior unconsciously manages the account back toward that familiar range. The fourth pattern, the silent money household. This is the environment where money was present but never discussed. Where the adults managed finances privately, and the subject was treated as something children should not be concerned with. Where there were no explicit negative messages about money, but also no explicit positive ones. No framework provided for understanding what money was, how it worked, what a healthy relationship with it looked like. The child in this environment develops a relationship with money characterized by uncertainty and discomfort. Money feels like a domain that belongs to other people, something that adults who understood it managed, while the child simply existed around it without access to the understanding that would make it feel navigable. At the trading desk, this pattern produces the trader who chronically defers to others. He follows signal groups. Yet he copies trades from accounts he respects without fully understanding the reasoning behind them. He reads every analysis published by every voice that sounds authoritative and tries to synthesize their views into a position he then takes without genuine conviction. When the position moves against him, he looks immediately for an external explanation from the same sources that provided the entry. He has a system. He may have spent considerable time building it, but he does not trust it, because trusting his own financial judgment was never modeled for him. The household communicated through silence that financial navigation was something done by people who already understood it, and he is still waiting, somewhere beneath his conscious awareness, for the person who understands it to tell him what to do. The fifth pattern, the money as love household. This is the environment where financial provision was the primary language of care, where love and money were expressed in the same currency, where a parent who could not express emotional warmth easily expressed financial generosity instead, where the child learned to associate being given money with being valued and losing financial support with being abandoned or disapproved of. At the trading desk, this pattern produces the most complicated and least visible of all the childhood expressions. This trader has a deeply unconscious need for the market to approve of him. He takes trades and then watches the outcome not primarily for the financial result, but for what the result communicates about him. A winning trade feels like approval, like being seen as worthy. Like the specific warmth that financial generosity produced in childhood. A losing trade activates a grief response that is entirely disproportionate to the financial reality of the loss. He also struggles with the impersonal nature of the market in a specific way. He keeps trying to find a relationship in something that has no relationship to offer. He looks for patterns that feel like the market responding to him personally. He reads market movements as communications about his merit rather than as the aggregate result of millions of unrelated participants making unrelated decisions. The market cannot give him what he is looking for, and the search for it will distort every trading decision he makes. Which of those 5 patterns do you recognize? Not the one that sounds most comfortable to claim. The one that sounds most like the trading behavior that keeps repeating. Leave it in the comments. Naming it is the beginning of working with it rather than being run by it. I want to tell you about a trader I worked with who had been in the markets for 6 years when we first spoke. He was not inexperienced. He had developed a genuine understanding of price action. His system was sound. His entries, evaluated on their own merits, were frequently correct. His analysis was the kind that other traders in his community respected. When he was not in a trade, watching the market from the outside, he could identify with considerable accuracy where the probable next move was. His live results told a completely different story. His journal showed 6 years of a pattern so consistent it was almost architectural. And every time his account grew to a specific threshold, it returned to a lower level within the following 2 to 3 weeks, not through a single catastrophic loss. Through a series of decisions that each had a surface justification and a deeper cause that the surface justification was concealing. He would size up after a winning streak. He would take setups that were one criterion short of his full requirement. He would move stops on positions that were working but not yet at his target. He would exit early on the winning trade that finally came after a string of disciplined smaller ones. Each decision made sense in isolation. As a pattern across 6 years, it was too consistent to be random. When I asked him to tell me about money in the household he grew up in, he paused in the specific way that people pause when a question lands closer to something real than they expected. He grew up watching his father make and lose money in cycles, a man of genuine intelligence and real capability, who never managed to hold on to what he built, businesses that grew and then failed. Periods of abundance followed by periods of genuine hardship. The child watching this pattern did not draw the conclusion that his father was making specific, correctable errors. He drew the conclusion that financial stability above a certain level was simply not available to people like them, not as a conscious belief, as the operating assumption beneath every financial decision he would make for the rest of his life. The ceiling in his trading account was not a technical problem, and it was the precise level above which his inherited framework did not believe financial stability was possible. And every time the account reached that level, the same unconscious mechanism that had watched his father's businesses return to baseline quietly arranged the trading decisions that would do the same. He had spent 6 years trying to fix this at the level of the chart. Better entries, tighter risk management, more disciplined journaling, more rigorous backtesting. All of it was genuine effort applied to the wrong level of the problem. When he finally understood where the ceiling was coming from, something shifted. Not immediately in the account. First, in the recognition, in the ability to name what was happening. To see, for the first time, that the self-sabotage at the threshold level was not random and not strategic, but an inherited emotional response to a pattern of financial experience that belonged to someone else's life. The market had not been teaching him that he could not succeed. His childhood had taught him that. And the market had simply been the arena where that lesson kept expressing itself until he was willing to look at it directly. The work that followed was not the work of the chart. It was the work of examining every belief he carried about money, tracing each one back to its origin, evaluating it as an adult rather than accepting it as a child, and deciding consciously which ones he was willing to carry forward and which ones he was ready to leave behind. It was the hardest work he had done in 6 years of trading. Yes, and it was the only work that changed anything. The reason childhood money patterns are so difficult to identify in trading is that they do not arrive wearing their true identity. They do not announce themselves as old programming influencing current behavior. They do not feel like echoes of a childhood money environment. They feel like trading analysis, like the considered judgment of an experienced market participant evaluating current conditions. This is the mechanism that keeps them invisible. And understanding it is essential before any attempt at change can be meaningful. When the scarcity pattern drives the early exit on a winning trade, it does not feel like the scarcity pattern. It feels like a reasonable assessment that the market is showing signs of potential reversal. Yet it feels like the professional caution of a trader who knows that open profit is not real profit until it is secured. It feels like discipline, like the willingness to take what the market offers rather than getting greedy and watching the gain evaporate. Every element of that internal narrative sounds like trading wisdom. None of it is original. All of it is the language of the trading education the trader has absorbed over years of study, recruited by the scarcity pattern to provide a legitimate-sounding justification for a decision being made for a completely different reason. When the shame pattern holds a losing position past the stop, it does not feel like the shame pattern. It feels like the mature confidence of a trader who does not let temporary market noise shake him out of a position he understands. Yes, it feels like the willingness to hold conviction under pressure. It feels like the discipline not to let a single red candle produce a reactive exit. Again, every element of that narrative sounds like the language of professional trading. None of it is coming from analysis. All of it is the shame pattern using borrowed trading language to justify what it needs to justify to protect itself from the verdict that a closed loss would represent. This is why better strategy education alone cannot fix these patterns. You cannot think your way out of a response that is generating its own justifications in the language of thought. The pattern will always be faster than the analysis. It will always have prepared its defense before you have finished asking the question. Yes, it will always be able to produce a trading reason for the trading behavior it is producing. The only way to see through this is to develop the specific discipline of examining not just what decision you are making, but what state you are in when you are making it. Not what the analysis says, but what the emotional signature of the decision feels like at the level below the justification. Is the urgency to exit this winning trade coming from a change in market structure? Or is it coming from a familiar anxiety about having and then losing that arrived before you checked the chart? Is the conviction to hold this losing position coming from a genuine belief in the trade thesis? Or is it coming from the specific discomfort of accepting a financial loss that was wired into you before you understood what a trade was? And these questions cannot be answered quickly. They cannot be answered in the heat of a live position. They require the kind of honest, patient, retrospective examination of your own patterns that most traders avoid because it requires looking in a direction that trading education never told them to look. Most traders who journal record what the trade did: entry price, exit price, setup quality, what the market did after the exit. Sometimes a note about what could have been done differently. This is a useful practice. It is not sufficient for the problem we are discussing. The kind of journaling that surfaces childhood money patterns requires a different set of questions. Questions that go beneath the trade to the state of the person who took it. After every session, before you close the platform and move on with your day, and spend 10 minutes answering these questions in writing. Not bullet points. Full sentences. Because the process of forming complete sentences about your internal experience is itself part of the work. It forces a level of precision that bullet points allow you to avoid. The first question: what was I feeling in my body before I entered this trade? Not what I was thinking analytically. What was the physical sensation? Was there tightness anywhere? Was there urgency? Was there a particular quality to the moment of entering that felt different from the analytical description of why the setup was valid? The second question: when I took this trade, was I responding to the market or to something the market was triggering in me? This is the critical distinction. The market as information versus the market as emotional stimulus. Yet the setup as a genuine signal versus the setup as the opportunity the emotional need was looking for. The third question: if I broke a rule in this session, what was happening in my body at the moment I broke it? What feeling was present that the rule break served? What would that feeling, traced back far enough, connect to in terms of what money felt like before trading was part of the picture? The fourth question: does the pattern in today's session resemble any pattern I recognize from my own history with money outside of trading? Not from other trading sessions. From life. From the way money worked in the environment I grew up in. These questions will not produce immediate clarity. In the early weeks of asking them honestly, the answers will often be vague. And the connections between the trading behavior and the early money patterns will not yet be visible with the resolution they will eventually achieve. But the practice of asking creates the habit of looking in the right direction. And over time, patterns emerge. Not the patterns of the chart. The patterns of the person reading the chart. The recurring emotional signatures that appear before specific trading decisions. The specific feelings that consistently precede the rule breaks. The particular quality of the urgency that drives the early exit or the held loser or the oversize entry. When those patterns become visible enough to name, you have gained something more valuable than a trading rule. You have gained the ability to see the mechanism before it operates. You have to recognize the feeling that has historically preceded the poor decision and to ask, in that moment of recognition, whether what you are about to do is a response to the market or a response to something the market is activating that predates the market entirely. That recognition is the beginning of genuine change. Not the end of the work, the beginning. But the beginning is everything. Because no change at the level of the chart will produce lasting improvement if the programming beneath the chart is still running the decisions that matter most. The question I was asked most often after explaining how childhood money patterns affect trading was the most natural question in the world. What do I do about it? I want to answer that question honestly. It's not with the kind of optimistic simplicity that makes for satisfying content, but produces no real change. With the kind of precision that actually describes what the process involves. Changing a deeply embedded belief about money is not accomplished by deciding to believe something different. If it were that simple, every trader who intellectually understood that losses are a normal part of the process would simply stop being emotionally devastated by them. Intellectual understanding and emotional programming are not the same system, and the emotional programming responds to evidence and repetition and direct experience, not to the logical arguments of the rational mind. What actually changes old money beliefs is a combination of three things: The first is identification with specificity. It's not the general acknowledgement that your childhood shaped your relationship with money, the precise naming of the specific belief. What exactly do you believe about money that was formed before you chose it? Not what you believe intellectually about money now. What you feel at the level of automatic response when money is present or absent or at risk. A trader who grew up in a scarcity household does not simply believe money is scarce. He believes something more specific. He believes that profit is temporary, that what arrives will leave, that the relief of having enough is always followed by the return of not enough. That belief, stated with that specificity, is something that can be examined. It can be held up against the evidence of his actual current financial reality. And it can be tested against what the market actually does versus what the pattern predicts it will do. The second is the separation of origin from current validity. The belief was formed in a specific context. That context was a household in a specific financial situation during a specific period of life. It was accurate to that context. It was the correct conclusion to draw from that specific set of experiences. But it is not a universal truth, and it does not necessarily apply to the current context of a trader with a real system and real capital and a real set of skills that did not exist in the child who formed the belief. This separation is not the same as denial. It is not pretending the belief was wrong to have formed. It is recognizing that a belief formed in one context to navigate that context does not automatically transfer its validity to a completely different one. The child who learned that money does not stay was learning something real about the household he grew up in. The trader who carries that belief into the market is applying a lesson that was relevant once to an environment where its relevance needs to be evaluated from scratch. The third is the accumulation of contradictory evidence through direct experience. The most powerful way to change a belief is to experience something that contradicts it consistently enough that the emotional system updates. This is why the process of clean execution at appropriate position size is not just a trading strategy. It is a belief update mechanism. Every time a stop is honored and the loss is manageable. Every time a winner is held to its target and the profit is real and stable. Every time the account grows and does not immediately collapse back to baseline. The operating system receives evidence that contradicts the old programming. This does not happen quickly. The old beliefs were formed across years of consistent reinforcement. They will update across months of consistent contradictory experience. There is no shortcut to this timeline, but the direction is clear. And the work of trading correctly, of executing the system with the discipline that the childhood patterns have been preventing, is not just the path to profitability. It is the path to replacing the beliefs that have been preventing profitability. The trading process and the psychological healing process are, for a trader who understands this connection, the same process. One of the most important things to understand about the market is that it has no awareness of your personal history. It does not know what you grew up believing about money. It does not adjust its behavior based on the emotional programming you bring to the session. It does not produce more forgiving price action for traders who carry difficult early money experiences. It does not punish traders for their psychological limitations with any awareness or intention. It simply moves, according to the collective decisions of every participant, without any reference to the internal landscape of any individual sitting in front of a chart. This is simultaneously the hardest and the most liberating aspect of what the market is. The hardest because it means the environment will not accommodate your patterns. It will not slow down while you work through the beliefs that are distorting your decisions. It will not produce gentler losses on the days when your childhood programming is particularly active. It will simply move, and your account will reflect the quality of your decisions regardless of what produced them. The most liberating because it means the market has no opinion about your history. That it does not know that money was scarce where you grew up. It does not know that financial mistakes were treated as moral failures in your household. It does not know about the ceiling that your inherited framework has been enforcing on your account. It is simply an environment, a large, complex, probabilistic environment that responds to capital and execution and nothing else. Which means that whatever you bring into it from your history, you also have the ability to change. Not because the market will help you change it, because the market is indifferent to it, because the programming that has been shaping your decisions is yours. It was installed by your experience. It can be examined by your awareness. It can be updated by new experience that contradicts its conclusions. And the market did not give you the childhood money patterns that are affecting your trading. It is simply the place where you have been discovering that they exist. And that discovery, however painful and however expensive, is the beginning of the most important work you will ever do as a trader. The work of identifying and updating childhood money patterns is long work. I will not pretend otherwise. But there are 3 specific practices that begin it, that start moving in the right direction from wherever you currently are. The first practice, the money autobiography. Spend 1 hour writing the story of money in your childhood. Not a brief summary, a genuine account. What was the financial atmosphere of the household you grew up in? What do you remember about the way adults around you talked about money or refused to talk about it? Sean, what were the earliest experiences you have of money being present and how it felt? Of money being absent and how it felt? Of watching a parent gain money or lose it and what that produced in the environment? Write it without editing for what sounds acceptable. Write the honest version, the one that includes the specific memories that carry emotional weight, the arguments you overheard, the things that were said, and the things that were conspicuously never said. Then read what you wrote and ask one question about each significant memory. What conclusion about money would a child naturally draw from this experience? Not what you now believe intellectually. What the child in that situation would have concluded. Those conclusions are the operating system. Yeah, seeing them written down is the first step toward deciding which ones you are still willing to run on. The second practice, the pre-session state audit. Before each trading session, before you open the platform, spend 5 minutes in deliberate attention to your internal state. Not a review of the market or a scan of the watch list. A genuine audit of how you feel right now. Not in general, specifically in relation to the session you are about to begin. Is there urgency? Is there anxiety? Is there a particular quality of need around today's session that was not present in your state yesterday? Is there a financial pressure sitting in the background that will influence how you evaluate setups today? Is there a recent loss that is still carrying emotional weight that will affect your willingness to take valid entries? That the purpose of this audit is not to achieve a perfect neutral state before every session. That standard is impossible and unhelpful. The purpose is to know what you are bringing into the session. To trade with awareness of the emotional conditions, rather than in ignorance of them. A trader who knows he is entering a session in a state of financial anxiety is in a fundamentally different position than one who enters that same state unknowingly. The aware trader can adjust. He can size down to account for the state. He can narrow his criteria to require more alignment before he enters. He can set a stricter daily loss limit that accounts for the reduced quality of his decision-making. The unaware trader cannot adjust for something he cannot see. Thus, the third practice, the pattern question after every rule break. Every time you break a rule in your trading, before you move on to the next session, ask one question and write the answer. What was the feeling that this rule break served? Not the